We think that we know a lot of the details that are involved in the Idaho 4 case, but a lot of these details have never been confirmed. Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky, and today I want to talk a little bit about the details that a lot of us talk about that surround the Idaho 4 case. Now, these are details that we believe to be true, but a lot of this information has never been confirmed. Some of this information has been debunked or proven that it couldn't be true, but even then, it's still never been confirmed whether this information is true or not by law enforcement. Let's start out with the video footage of Jack S. and Kaylee and Maddie walking to the grub truck from the corner club. Now, this video, as well as audio, appears that Jack S. is telling Maddie, "They're gonna get you, Maddie." But is that really what Jack S. said in that video? Because as you listen to that video or that audio, it sounds like there's more to it. It sounds like there's more that's being said. And I know that sound experts have listened to this audio, and a lot of them believe that Jack S. is basically telling Maddie, "We're going to get you some food." Maybe not in those exact words, but basically, it sounds more like Jack S. is telling Maddie, "We're going to get you something to eat," not "they're going to get you, Maddie." So I always thought it was kind of strange that that video and that audio was caught at that very second where Jack would have said, "They're going to get you, Maddie." And I always thought it was strange that there wasn't anything more to that video. It just seemed like that was the piece that was released, and that's what everyone ran with, including myself. So I do believe that there was more said in that video, and I tend to believe that Jack did not tell Maddie that they were going to get her. I feel like it was more of an innocent conversation that they were having as they were walking to the grub truck. Also, I don't believe that it's ever been confirmed that the individual who was sitting inside the corner club talking to Maddie and Kaylee on the surveillance cam photo was Jack D., Kaylee's ex-boyfriend. Now, I wholeheartedly believe that that is Jack D. in that photo. And if it's not Jack D., then it's someone who is wearing Jack D.'s clothing, in my opinion. Now, a lot of people would say, why is this even important? Maybe it was Jack D. Why is that so important? And in my opinion, I believe that it's important because Jack D. told law enforcement that he was at home, in bed, asleep, when these crimes occurred. But if this individual in this security cam photo who's talking to Kaylee and Maddie is in fact Jack D., then we know that he was at the corner club until approximately 2 a.m. He would have still had to get home, and that would have taken a little bit of time. And then he just jumped right into bed and fell fast asleep immediately. That just wouldn't make sense. So I believe there's a lot of importance to this being Jack D. in this photo. Because for one, it tells us that he was at the corner club talking to Kaylee and Maddie at approximately 2 a.m. And it also tells us that he was talking to the girls only hours before they lost their lives. In the very beginning, on the day that these crimes occurred, Robin Nance from KXLY News did a breaking news segment. And in that segment that did air, she said that 4 students found dead and 1 went to the hospital. Now, this segment didn't stay up very long. It was wiped off the internet pretty quickly. But a lot of us saw this segment. And at the time, it probably didn't seem odd to us at all because we didn't have any other details. So it wouldn't have seemed odd, for Robin Nance to say that 4 students were found dead and 1 went to the hospital, and we wouldn't have known any different because we didn't know the details at the time. But this segment was wiped off of the internet. And there's a few creators that do have that segment. So we do know that it happened. And we do know from seeing that segment, as well as the confirmation that was allegedly given by Robin Nance. So I think it's a rather important piece of information because I don't feel as though law enforcement would go through the trouble of trying to bury this story if it didn't have some significant meaning to it. So it's never been confirmed, that someone did go to the hospital that morning, but it's also never been denied that someone went to the hospital that morning. A lot of people have said, well, maybe that's not possible because nobody reported seeing an ambulance leave the house that morning. But people arrive to the hospital in private cars all the time. It's not uncommon at all for someone to be driven to the hospital in a private car. So it's very possible that someone was driven to the hospital in a private car, maybe before 911 was called. So, it might have happened early in the morning and none of the neighbors saw, this person getting into the car and leaving to go to the hospital. So I think that's a very important detail. Anything that is removed from the public eye off of the internet from law enforcement, in my opinion, is important because there's a reason that they're removing this information from the internet. Either it has a lot of value or a lot of substance. And investigators are removing this from the internet because they don't want it in the public eye. They're basically trying to hide these details. Now, what about the 8 hours that it took before 911 was called? Now, we know that Dylan and Bethany were both in the house at the time that these crimes occurred. They were both in the house when 4 of their roommates brutally lost their lives. And yet, neither one of them ever called 911. So, we've never had any clarification as to why these 2 roommates never called 911. Now, we heard the frozen shock phase and that kind of stuff. But to me, it would have always made more sense if these roommates would have just said, we were scared about what might happen if we tried to call 911. And we didn't want to put ourselves in danger because we were worried about what might happen to us. That I could definitely accept. That I could definitely understand. But it doesn't seem like we've ever gotten a solid answer or a solid explanation as to why these roommates never called 911. To me, that's one of the most important aspects of this investigation because it's just one of those aspects of this crime That does not make sense. Also, Dylan stated to law enforcement that she saw this intruder. Now, Dylan was able to describe his body type, so it wouldn't seem as though he was well covered up or wearing a big heavy coat if she could tell his body type. Now, she also said that, he was wearing a mask, but she was able to distinguish his eyebrows. She said that he had bushy eyebrows and that he was about 5'10", 5'10 plus. So she gives a very generic description of the person who she saw walk past her door that morning. But did she see Bryan Koberger? I feel like Bryan Koberger has a very pronounced brow, and I feel like his eyes would have been recognizable. Even if Bryan Koberger was wearing a mask, which again, that seems very odd to me as well, because this intruder had just been in one hell of a battle. So how did he manage to keep his mask intact and keep his mask on? Dylan saw his eyes because she saw his eyebrows. And I feel like Bryan Koberger, has a very distinct brow and his eyes. I feel like, those would have been eyes that Dylan would have remembered. But we don't really have any clarification about that. Dylan saw somebody, but did she see Bryan Koberger? It seems as though if she saw him that night and somehow his mask was still intact, but she was able to see his eyes and she was able to distinguish his body type, it would seem as though she got a pretty decent look at him and that she could probably identify him from a photo or from a lineup. So it's never really been confirmed. We've been told that Dylan did see someone walk by her bedroom door. But was that Bryan Koberger? It's never really been confirmed. I've heard people say Dylan saw Bryan Koberger walk past her bedroom door. But it's never been confirmed that who Dylan saw was Bryan Koberger. So we don't really know that. It just seems like we would have some clarification if Dylan actually saw, and could identify Bryan Koberger. That would be a game changer in this case, in my opinion. Which leads me to a piece of evidence that's probably one of the most important pieces of evidence that we actually know nothing about, and that's the knife sheath. Was the knife sheath still intact? Was the belt loop, broken? Was, maybe the knife sheath was pulled on and the intruder's belt broke and the sheath slid off in one piece. So what was the condition of this knife sheath? And another major question is, how many sources of DNA were on the knife sheath? Was it just Bryan Koberger's DNA that was on this knife sheath in a little spot on the button snap? There was no other body fluids on this knife sheath or anything like that. It was just this one little piece of DNA, touch DNA, from Bryan Koberger on this entire knife sheath. It seems as though this knife sheath would have a lot of DNA on it, that it would at least have, some body fluid on it. So we don't really know a whole lot about this major piece of evidence. There's strong evidence that the wounds between some of the victims were inconsistent. Basically, they didn't match which is kind of another way of saying that there were multiple different weapons possibly used to commit these crimes. Now, why would a perpetrator be holding a weapon in each hand? That just wouldn't make sense. This person would want to have a free hand in case they needed to brace themselves or to manipulate one of the victims. It just wouldn't make sense that this perpetrator would be carrying a weapon in each hand. So, if there were multiple weapons used, that would be a good indication that there were also multiple attackers. So although we know that the weapons were inconsistent from victim to victim, it's never been confirmed that there was more than one weapon used, and it's definitely never been confirmed that there was more than one perpetrator. If the wounds don't match from victim to victim, it seems as though it would just be common sense that there was more than one weapon used. Now, is it possible that one individual could have been holding two different weapons, one in each hand? Sure, it's possible, but I doubt that it's very likely because, in my opinion, this attacker would need a free hand. So it wouldn't make a lot of sense for just one attacker to be holding two separate weapons. To me, it makes more sense that there would be two attackers, each holding a different weapon. Now, something else that has never really made sense to me and has definitely never had any clarification is how law enforcement initially zeroed in on Bryan Koberger. Many of us believe that there's a possible informant who turned law enforcement onto Bryan Koberger right away. We know that law enforcement has described, Bryan Koberger's car driving around the crime scene over and over in surveillance video. But it appears that they definitely had something much more solid than that. We know that law enforcement wouldn't have known that the DNA that was on the knife sheath belonged to Bryan Koberger before they decided to follow him 2,500 miles across country. So they wouldn't have known that that DNA belonged to Bryan Koberger when they followed him to Pennsylvania. So what led police to be so sure about Bryan Koberger as a suspect that they were willing to follow him 2,500 miles across country? What was it? What was that solid piece of information that led law enforcement directly to Bryan Koberger? It's never been clarified as to how law enforcement zeroed in on this suspect, which is kind of strange because I think we know that it wasn't because of the surveillance video of this white Hyundai Elantra driving around the area. I mean, it would seem silly to think that that was how law enforcement zeroed in on Bryan Koberger. So there was definitely something more solid, something that law enforcement was tipped off to. And it's never really been confirmed as to what it was that led law enforcement to this suspect. Now, last but certainly not least, I want to talk about this fake Bryan Koberger Instagram page. Now, according to a lot of people, this Instagram page that supposedly belonged to Bryan Koberger was following some of the victims and allegedly even tried to DM one of these victims. Now, I made a video about this a while back, and we talked about this fake Instagram page that was created right after Bryan Koberger was arrested. And the reason that we know that someone took the opportunity to create an Instagram page for Bryan Koberger right after he was arrested is because of the information that's on the page. Now, there's a creator who's tagged in the one photo that's on this fake Bryan Koberger Instagram page. And that creator comes out and talks about this in an interview on this platform. And he basically explains that this page was created for somebody else. And he was tagged in the one photo on this Instagram page. Now, he claims, and it would make sense because this individual is in California. He knows nothing about the Idaho 4 crimes at this time. So he's explaining how this Instagram page came about and how an individual took the opportunity, once he knew Bryan Koberger's name after he was arrested, to make a fake Instagram page for him. Now, why somebody would do this, I have no idea. But that is what this person did. And if you watch my video, I feel like we pretty much debunked this fake Instagram page. It wasn't Bryan Koberger's Instagram page. It was somebody who took the opportunity to create a fake Instagram page for Bryan Koberger in order to, cause some problems within the investigation. And that's exactly what happened, because there's a lot of people out there who still believe that this Instagram page belonged to Bryan Koberger. So if you get a chance, go back and watch my video. I talk about the whole process of how this false Instagram page was created. So far, we have yet to see any connection between Bryan Koberger and these victims, or anyone who lived in the King Road house. And that's really important because, if there's no connection and no motive, then what are we really looking at here? I mean, so far there's no connection to the victims, no connection to the King Road house, no motive as to why Bryan Koberger would have committed these crimes. And, really no explanation as to how he would have committed these crimes by himself. Really, not a whole lot of information at all has been confirmed in these Idaho 4 cases. Every piece of information in this case has basically been left open-ended. Investigators have not confirmed any information. They have not denied any information. They just really haven't given any information about this investigation. And that's strange, because you would think that they would want to show their work and show why Bryan Koberger is their suspect. Ann Taylor has just filed her 13th motion for discovery. So it doesn't really appear as though there's a lot of clarifying going on between the prosecution and the defense. Ann Taylor has said that she doesn't even understand how law enforcement zeroed in on her client. So it doesn't sound like they're confirming a whole lot of information. The prosecution really doesn't seem to have their case together, which may be because their entire investigation could very well hinge on an informant. So it doesn't seem like the prosecution wants to confirm any of this information. It's all open-ended. And, this prosecution does appear to be playing games. They like to kind of do little sneaky things, and then they'll go into court and make it sound as though they're doing everything by the book. But that's not what it appears from the outside. From the outside, it looks like this prosecution is playing games with the defense. And this is a capital murder case. This is serious. And at some point, this prosecution will need to confirm their information and show their work, if they're able to do that, if they're even able to show their work. It's going to be really interesting to see how the prosecution pulls all of this together at the trial. Hopefully, it's a lot more understandable than it has been, because eventually this prosecution is going to have to confirm this information, and they're going to have to show their work, because they can't just leave everything open-ended. They're going to have to confirm their information and show their work. And I'm kind of curious to see how they do that. Thanks for watching my video today, and thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you like my video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching my video, and we'll see you next time.